Um, yeah, thank you to the organizers for inviting me to speak. It's a great honor to speak with many of the individuals here. I am based in the US and as one of many in the Hong Kong diaspora fighting for solidarity with their movement back home. I don't claim to speak for the whole movement or even the Hong Kong left, and I want to acknowledge my privilege in being able to speak about the movement while friends and comrades are fearing for their safety and livelihoods every moment. I want to start by suggesting that the national security laws reveal some hard truths and limits about Hong Kong's existing international strategy. Bill after bill has been passed by different countries, but the situation continues to worsen. The international strategy, like the movement on the ground, is turning mainly defensive by this point, having to focus on securing asylum for refugees, etc. And while these pursuits are absolutely vital with the ever worsening climate in Hong Kong, I want to suggest that a renewed understanding of the international strategy can provide new positive visions for the movement. As the Black Lives Matter protests, uprisings in Puerto Rico and Chile last year all remind us, building community engagement from the bottom up is the key to radical change. And likewise, the best support for Hong Kong is not just in this room right now, it's in continuing to shift the larger discourses with our constituencies, our communities, workers, and activists from around the world, for them to think independently for themselves about the injustice in Hong Kong. And as Mr. John McDonnell said a few days ago in solidarity with Uyghurs, what we need is to build among workers movement across the globe for solidarity, supporting wherever we can. And we can be very concrete about this. Hong Kong diaspora is spread across the world, many in the heart of inspiring social movements, and Hong Kong diaspora groups can serve as bridges with unions, local community organizations, Chinatown groups, etc., to learn from one another's struggles and push back against violent counter-narratives. We must remember that China and Western governments all benefit from the violent legacy of colonialism and are now repressing democratic movements with the same tools of policing and surveillance. Despite condemning foreign interference, China has willingly allowed US law enforcement, for example, to train up Hong Kong police force for decades, allowing American and British tear gas and riot control weaponry to be imported. Mass movements must, in turn, also learn from each other, exchanging strategies and ideas together among organizers in the connective fight against global capital, which is maintained by authoritarian violence from US to China. And we must be clear that one of the greatest challenges to this international solidarity comes from within the left itself. There has been an active disinformation campaign, as Paul alluded to earlier, from outlets like Grey Zone, deliberately whitewashing China's own history of inter-imperial collusion with Western capital and powers and writing off the entire Hong Kong movement as somehow fascist or CIA-backed. They willingly erase countless ethnic minorities' voices from Xinjiang and deny their suffering and struggle. These people confound the narrative on the left with blatant lies, and they're supported by people in the Labour Party right now, in American left organizations and other circles. Of course, you must fight tooth and nail against anti-Chinese racism, but not by hijacking anti-racist practice to gather support for a murderous Chinese regime. And the appearance of reactionary elements in the Hong Kong movement should be condemned, but it's no excuse to support or remain silent about the Chinese state, which has disastrously courted Western capital and resources at a scale to super exploit its own workers, much larger than any individual protesters can even strive for. We need to combat these narratives within our own movements and disrupt the consensus that it's okay to remain neutral and continue platforming apologists for Chinese state's war crimes in the left. We need to think out of this Cold War narrative given to us by Chinese and American state elites and these pro-Chinese Communist Party leftists. Siding with China against the US is not an anti-war position. It is an amplification of a new Cold War dynamic that is only destructive for the international working class. Hong Kong is one of the most inequitable cities with the most severe wage gap and most expensive housing market in the world, used for decades as a tool by China to benefit from Western investments at the expense of the livelihood and freedom of Hong Kongers. As one anonymous protester put it, Hong Kong is a heaven for the rich and hell for the others. And it would be unfair to say that the social inequity does not influence Hong Kongers' demands at all. Last year, as Lee have alluded to already, Hong Kong has also seen the biggest wave of unionization yet the city has seen, supported by Hong Kong Confederation of Trade Unions and other organizers, with over 60 different sectors unionizing: freelancers, dental equipment producers, stage dancers, metro workers, H&M employees. Many of these have never unionized, and are focused on the larger anti-establishment fight. Many are also connecting political and economic demands of their workplace. And there is a massive opportunity for those of us with expertise in union and social movements to support, build with, and amplify their work. Last month, the group I'm part of, Lausan Collective, helped facilitate an exchange between unionized medical workers from Hong Kong's Hospital Authority Employees Alliance, who organized a major strike in February, and rank and file medical workers from SEIU and National Nurses United in the United States. We talked about how the workplace struggle can connect to larger ongoing social movements and the necessity of the self-activity and agency of rank and file workers. These are the type of conversations groups like Labor Movement Solidarity with Hong Kong can help facilitate, not only for Hong Kongers, but for workers around the world. The Hong Kong and Chinese diaspora can work with allies to model and develop what an anti-authoritarian, anti-racist, and anti-capitalist movement can look like together, to show the movement back home that there is always still hope. I want to end with a reminder about one of the many, perhaps long forgotten things that the CCP took away from us in the early days of the handover. In the final years of British rule, labor activists like Mr. Lee Chuk-in here and other HKCTU activists helped fight to pass a law guaranteeing workers' right to collective bargaining. And this right to collective bargaining was one of the first things abolished by Beijing within weeks of the handover. This is because Beijing knows that the most powerful thing is everyday working Hong Kongers and Chinese people's self-activity, self-organization, and independence of mind to speak out and transform their own material conditions together. Beijing wants to atomize us, first by cutting our collective power in the workplace, and now through our collective will to safeguard our own very basic freedom of speech. But this past month proves that Hong Kongers are still fighting collectively for basic democratic demands despite all odds, turning out over 600,000 to risk arrest for an unofficial primary election that may very well be disqualified by Beijing anyway. This solidarity must extend beyond Hong Kong, from a grassroots level internationally, beyond the closed doors of lobbying chambers. That means Hong Kongers in the diaspora and allies must continue doing the work to link up with a global mass movement against state repression and exploitation, from Kashmir and West Papua to Palestine. This is no mere idealism. It is a pragmatic hope that Hong Kongers would finally be able to break out of all colonial forces that have and are still trapping us once and for all. Thank you.